So I've been hearing a lot of great things about the Barber Wrathful Heart recently. Some of you guys have even said that it is probably better than the Creeping Death and the Poison Imbuement, so I just had to put a build together and test it for myself. Obviously, the Barber is really effective at clearing packs of mobs because you don't have to sit there for the Poison Imbuement to tick to kill your enemies. Instead, you're just dealing massive AoE damage on basically every hit, right? So this version of the Barber's Blade build is probably a little bit different than some of the other ones that are already out there, but they all work. From what I've noticed, basically the Barber works with just about any setup you use. It's just all about dealing as much damage basically on your stats, right? As long as your Twisted Blades hits hard enough, then you're going to have this insane amount of clearing potential or speed running potential. Now, the build is not perfect. In my opinion, it does lack a little bit in some other aspects of the game. But hey, if you want to have something that is really fun, really fast, really effective, even all the way up to tier 100s, then this is definitely something you are going to enjoy. But do not make it the end-all, be-all of rogue melee builds, because I still believe that some of the other ones that we've already covered are still really, really good. Anyway, all that said, let's check the gear, the skills, and the Paragon points of this version of the build. So let me explain how my setup works. We're using dash to initiate fights because we are using the aspect that allows us to drop a smoke grenade at the end of a dash. This aspect also allows us to reduce the cooldown of our dash so we can follow up pretty quickly to the next pack. However, I'm also using Shadow Step as our source of Unstoppable, but also as a way to drop yet another smoke grenade, which is going to be the actual skill itself, right? So we got some pretty insane mobility in between packs of mobs, so we can follow up very, very quickly into basically nuking them and then moving on to the next one. When it comes to elites with certain affixes, well, we don't have concealment anymore, so you need to be really careful. You need to kind of go in there, unleash your combo, and get out. That's the only way you're going to handle with the really tough ones, but overall, it does work fantastic. As for our damage, we're using Twisted Blades, obviously, as just kind of like raw damage, but we're also using the Cold Imbuement because we can increase our damage a little bit with the Cold Imbuement. Therefore, very, very effective, very strong, very fast, ton of damage, but again, it is not necessarily perfect. So for the gear setup, I wanted to reuse as many pieces as I could from our other builds, so this is not necessarily optimized. You could have pieces that are a little bit more universal, so you'd have less pieces to swap. But let me still go over the changes that I've made and why. Our helm, we have changed it completely. We needed intelligence, and I'll get back to that once we do the Paragon boards. It was obviously for the stats so that we can maintain our strength and intelligence above 620, but we are using the Quickening Fog aspect, all right? So that's the one that I told you about, getting our smoke grenade at the end of dash and then reducing the cooldown. As for the chest piece, same as before with Shared Misery. Our gloves, same as before with Frostbitten, which obviously we're still taking advantage of, and now it is even more efficient because critical strike damage is working towards the Barber, whereas it wasn't doing as much with our poison build. Noxious Ice would be better, but I think that Frostbitten is a little bit better at instantly freezing mobs when you hit a pack of mobs, right? So basically with Penitent Greaves, Cold Imbuement, and the grenades that we get on our heart, you get some pretty efficient AoE freeze. For the pants, same as before, Disobedience, still there, Penitent Greaves. Our crossbow, we went back to the one we had before, which has critical strike damage with the emeralds in them, right? Instead of the one we're using for the poison build, although they both would work. You could only swap your gems and you would still be good to go. As for our amulet, we've changed this one completely to have a more universal amulet that could be reused for pretty much all the content, but I decided to change it for the time being because I didn't want to swap hearts more than I needed to test this build, and we went with the Umbrus on our amulet instead. Because we're not using concealment, we're going to take more damage from the enemies, and if you don't instantly CC them, basically Marksman is up a little bit more often because it's now on our amulet, and we don't really need the Corruption one anymore that we used to run on the Creeping Death on our other amulet, right? So again, these could be the same stats, but the aspects will change and the heart will change. As for the rings, kind of the same concept here. This one could be universal, but I did change it still with this one, which has poisoned damage, and this one has bursting venom, so I didn't want to have to change my aspect all the time, and we're using the one with the stun. Okay, so decent ring overall, but again, this could be universal and work in both cases. You would just have to swap the aspect. As for the other one, same concept. Twisting Blades again, Twisting Blades along with the suppressed damage by 20% continues to be the best. This one has physical damage, whereas the other one had poison damage, all right? But again, this could be universal. It could be like imbued skill damage instead of those modifiers so that it could work for all the different builds. And finally, for our two weapons, we're using the two unique ones. So we're using Ashira's Conjar and Condemnation. It does not have to be this. In fact, you could use other daggers, which could open up other possible aspects that you could run. But this one was kind of mandatory now for the Poison Blade build, and this one was mandatory for the Concealment, right? But now that we're not using either of those, then you get those two free slots. And if you were to use a dagger with this, for example, with all stats, then it would be even easier to hit your maximum amounts. As for the specialization, combo points continues to be the best in slot for maximum damage. And then for our skills, let's go over the changes. We have Puncture along with Twisting Blades, but we've made a change to our last passive for reduced cooldown because of what I explained before. We now have other sources of daze, which comes from our Smoke Grenade. And because we have it on our dash and the skill itself, I felt like we could try and get more cooldown reduction to be even faster. We still have 3 points in Sturdy and Siphoning Strikes, 3 points into Shadow Step. We now have 3 points into Dash instead of Concealment. We now have 3 points in Rugged. This was improved since the last patch. It is very nice, very effective to help you deal with any kind of modifiers in dungeons that have damage over time, like poison, burning, shadow, and all that stuff. We now have 3 points into Concussive because we're not using traps. Therefore, Trap Mastery is perhaps or it's not needed, basically. So I'm trying to make up for it with extra crit rate into this passive right here, which will work nicely for mobs, but unfortunately will not work really against bosses. We still have 1 point into Rapid Gambits and Trick Attacks, and then we have 3 points for Smoke Grenade, along with the countering Smoke Grenade, and then Dark Shroud and into Subverting Dark Shroud, because we don't have movement speed on our amulet anymore, so we are making up for that with a little bit of movement speed here. We're back to using Malice, Exploit, and Weapon Mastery because it is now relevant with the Barber Heart, but we've dropped completely everything for the Poison Imbuement, which has freed up a lot of the passive points here. Instead, we're using Cold Imbuement along with Mixed Cold Imbuement, Frigid Finesse. We still have 3 points into Innervation, 3 points into Haste, and we are still using the Close Quarters Combat, but you could definitely use Momentum here for the extra damage reduction, movement speed, and energy regeneration if you want to be safer. Now, we could even argue that Close Quarters Combat is almost not needed for the extra attack speed because we have Ashuras, and also the extra 30% damage against crowd-controlled enemies might not even be needed. We're already hitting hard enough to one-shot packs of mobs. Finally, for the Paragon board, same setup minus a few little changes here and there to ensure that we hit our 620 intelligence and strength. Okay, so like for example, these little switches here sometimes are very easy to do and will allow you to kind of just shift like stats from one or the other, which is why I've changed the main stat on the helm. So instead of being all stats, it is now intelligence. This was to ensure that I still had my 620 and 620 here on my 6th board. One other change that I did not make and that I should make was to change my 7th board because I'm not using traps anymore. I would have to go with the Eldritch Bounty, and the Exploit Glyph would still work in there with the same amount of points and hitting 29 of 25 strength. Okay, so on the planner that will be in the description, I will make that change for you guys, as well as the little tweaks that I've done here and there for the stats. But overall, it's the same exact board as before. Probably not optimal. You could definitely make an even better Barber build, but like I explained in the beginning, don't let this be the end-all be-all of builds because, one, it is only good for Season 1, but also because it does not excel on absolutely everything in the game. So once I put together my little tier list of rogue builds, I will rate this build for everything in the game. So obviously from dungeons to, let's say, just kind of regular farming, maybe even PvP, but also more importantly, Uber Lilith, right? So Uber Lilith is one of the goals of the season. A tier 100 is not, okay? So you don't need to speedrun tier 100 dungeons. You need to speedrun dungeons to build up your glyphs to do Uber Lilith, all right? And ultimately, if you're going to do Uber Lilith, I think you're going to be using the Poison Blades. Anyway, that's the gist of the Barber Blades build that I've been using for the past couple of days. I've done quite a few dungeons so far, succeeded a lot of tier 100s with this. Again, it works nicely. It feels a little bit faster than the Poison Blades build, but again, they're both very viable end game builds. Anyway, all that said, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.